We're back after a little bit of a hiatus. We had a couple of cancellations because, this awful thing that we're just learning to live with called COVID kept going around, as well as the regular flu. So we are excited to bring you a show that is very personal, probably our rawest, realest episode yet. We're speaking very candidly from a place of frustration and pain around being in the shackles of student loan debt. And so, just to connect the dots on what today's episode is going to discuss, it's called Treacherous Collection Tactics. So, for people who have been dealing with this, you're aware that with private loans, especially, there are companies that are just outright basically making profit off of the loans that they can charge you and get you to borrow for your education. And so there's really two main buckets, right? There's the private, there's the federal, and then there is technically a little bit of gray area with Parent Plus loans. Those will be for another episode, but for the sake of today's conversation, to make it easy to follow and keep it simple, we're going to be specifically speaking to the pain points, mostly associated with private loans and just how challenging that can be for borrowers who are in a very vulnerable state financially and don't have the capital to regularly maintain those payments. So, after a conversation that I had by total happenstance back in the spring, I attended the Guardian Summit, which is hosted by Camelback Ventures down in New Orleans. I had the pleasure of connecting with a group. They had us do an exercise over the topic of financial trauma and basically being willing to share as much as we were comfortable about our lived financial experiences and some of the things that we've gone through in our journeys that really created a lot of headache and heartbreak, just as far as especially debt is concerned. And so one of those people who was in my group was just a beacon of light, and he was so transparent and shared a very vulnerable story that a lot of people probably at first interaction would have withheld. But because it was for sure a safe space where we could kind of, as he put it, trauma bond and be able to build off of what the other has lived through, I remembered that. And so, just in trying to get ourselves back on track for our production schedule, I reached out to him very, very recently, a few days ago, just to see if he'd be willing to come on as our guest. And he was gracious enough to do that. So, I'm going to introduce him with a quick bio, real quick. So, our guest today is Tomas Alvarez III, who is a co founder and managing partner of Idea to Form, a BIPOC led creative studio whose mission is to design solutions that connect, activate, and inspire people to build a more equitable world. With over 20 years of experience in the social sector, Tomas is a visionary thinker, cultural broker, and transformational leader who has been recognized as an Ashoka Fellow and a CNN hero for his innovative and impactful work. At Idea to Form, Tomas works closely with leading nonprofits, foundations, and purpose driven companies to co design and amplify their social impact initiatives. He has partnered with notable groups such as Emerson Collective, Kauffman Foundation, Ashoka, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. He's also a trustee of the Grunin Foundation, a family foundation focused on promoting economic development through the arts, education, and healthcare. Tomas has expertise in community development, youth development, facilitation, social entrepreneurship, impact investing, and design for social impact, and is the author of a book on rap and hip hop and therapy and a former lecturer at Stanford University. Without further ado, so glad to have you with us today. Welcome, Tomas.
Hello. Hi, everyone. How's it going? Great to be here.
Hey, great to have you with us all the way from sunny California. I know it's early
Mhm.
over there, so appreciate you waking up and getting a jump on this so early into your day. Thank you for graciously accepting the invitation to join. I know I pretty much ambushed you on like Tuesday or Wednesday. Like, are you available Friday? So I really am glad that things worked out to where you could join because just as I was reflecting on how we can breathe new life and energy into this show and learning from already our first few episodes, I feel like I was still kind of holding back, like trying to be a bit measured and just playing it safe in terms of the discussion topics and making it a little bit more neutral. Whereas today, we're going for the kill, right? Treacherous collection tactics. I think that name is pretty pointed, right, in and of itself. So, if you would, obviously, you and I have talked about it from that conversation back in May, but if you would just kind of give the audience an overview of your lived financial trauma around student debt?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, money should never prevent somebody from pursuing higher education, in my opinion, especially considering the fact that we live in, the wealthiest country in the world. Um, I think that for a lot of students, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, who don't necessarily have families that can afford to pay full freight, we really rely on um, access to grants and loans to subsidize our college expenses. And so for me, that was the only way. And as a young person, you don't understand the implications of that decision to, or your parents, in some cases. There's the promise of education and what that's going to do to transform your life, and it does. Education in college and having a degree absolutely can be a game changer for many people. But depending on which career you go into. And so for me, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, and started off as graphic design and eventually ended up with social work, and decided to pursue my passion. And for those who are familiar with the field of social work, it doesn't pay much. Same thing with education and some other helping professions out there. It's amazing, needed work, important work. But to come out the gate with a master's degree, a lot of my peers were making at the time between $30,000 and $40,000 a year. And so after, of course, that 6 month grace period, you're expected to pay back your student loans. And living at the time, I was living in the Bay Area, one of the most expensive places to live in the year. The numbers just don't add up. When you're making $35,000 a year and you got, a $600 a month payment. And so, yeah, when it was all said and done, I had borrowed a total of $72,000 to subsidize my undergraduate and graduate studies. That was in addition to actually getting some grants and scholarships. So it would have been significantly more had it not been for that assistance. But coming out of college, or graduate school, I decided to start my own nonprofit, and that was doing hip hop therapy, working with young folks in Oakland and throughout the Bay Area, building a community-based organization from scratch, without the benefit of an angel donor or a seed funder. This was really a community-led initiative, and we bootstrapped this from the ground up. And so there was no budget to pay salaries. This was all work that we were doing as a labor of love, and eventually started to secure smaller and smaller budgets, and eventually grew that over time. But it wasn't until several years in that I could actually afford to pay staff to do the work that we were doing, and myself. And it never really got to a point to where I could pay myself a livable wage. So I constantly had to make that decision: do I pay myself or do I pay my staff? Which is what a lot of executive directors of community-based organizations have to make, those tough decisions about where they allocate resources. And so for me, you could never really make enough in my field, make secure enough funding for the organization to pay myself a livable wage. And so eventually, over time, defaulted on my student loans, just could not afford to pay them. And when you're faced with paying rent or paying a student loan, you're obviously going to keep a roof over your head. Or when you're faced with the decision to pay groceries over a student loan, of course, you're gonna do that. And so, yeah, for me, it just became a source of anxiety and stress. And it was easier to just kind of compartmentalize and tune it out. And, I'll deal with that when I have more capacity. But right now I'm trying to build this organization, get it to a place of sustainability. This work is crucially important, and this is what I've been, put here on this earth to do. And so, so yeah, I after defaulting on my student loans, of course, it goes to collection. You start getting the calls, you start getting the emails. When they can't get a hold of you after harassing you every single day, they start reaching out to people in your circle, your closest family and friends. And that was obviously very disturbing and upsetting. But everybody kind of learned to kind of tune that out. And so it was just this constant annoyance. And I think for me, the tipping point came when when it went to collection, they kept passing to different collection companies. And one company in particular added, it was probably the second collection company, added a $25,000 collection fee to my student loans. And so it went from about 75,000 to 100,000 like overnight. and then within a few months sold that debt to another collection agency who added another $25,000 collection fee. Um, so then it increased by 50K, my balance amount. And then, after many years of, just building my organization and finally getting, some resources and being able to pay myself a modest salary, I was able to, with my partner at the time, have the opportunity to buy a house. And of course, this is home ownership is the American dream. It's something that it's how folks build wealth. And the mortgage advisor had recommended that I not apply for the loan because I was a liability because of my defaulted student loan, even though everything else was in order.
Yeah.
And so I decided to not go in and on that house. But then eventually, because we were married, the 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 financial institution said, no, we have to consider his student loan. And so there was no choice for me but to rehabilitate my loan. And we were in escrow to close the house, and we had so many days to do that. And so the loan had fallen apart, and they needed me to rehabilitate my loans, which I did. But to do that, I had to sign a document that said, the amount shown is the amount that I owe. Which, at that point, I didn't have time to contest the $50,000 of collection fees. And it was literally having to choose between signing that paper, which there was no option to have a caveat there or to contest it. We would have lost the house. And so, I reluctantly signed it, and, hoping that it was something that I could contest down the road. But I literally felt like I was backed in a corner. And if I didn't sign this paper, we would lose this house. And it was the opportunity of a lifetime to buy a house that was off the market, under market value. Something that was a dream for both me and my partner at the time. And so, yeah, those are the tough choices that, that people, in this type of circumstances face, the tough choices of whether or not they pay for rent or student loans, or having to be subject to, these harmful collection tactics, and then, have no other recourse, but to go along with it because they're in a vulnerable situation.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. As where things stand now is, I still plan on contesting that $50,000. My loan is no longer in default. I'm making monthly payments now that I'm in a better financial situation, and I have no problem paying back what I borrowed. But the $50,000 collection fees is something that I will go to my grave fighting. And so hopefully one day I come back on this show and share how I was able to successfully get that removed. But until then, I'm open to any advice you have or others have, because that just doesn't feel right.
It's not right. I mean, as I hear you say it again, like I just remember, I mean, there was so much that was happening right over those 2 days that the conference was in New Orleans. And this particular story has just lingered like a broken record in my mind. Just the liberties, the gall to just say, we own this now. And because it's in our hands, here's a $25,000 surcharge on that. And then it happened not once, but twice. And I mean, just at a fundamental ethics level, it's like, how is this even permissible in the eyes of the law? I'm willing to bet that somewhere it's not, but part of the issue I'm noticing is that these laws and the policies and the terms, they're so ever changing and fluid because part of their whack and sick strategy is just confusing the dog crap out of people and being like, yeah, we're just going to tire them out because once they get so in over their eyebrows trying to fight us, they're just going to give up and then they're just going to own it. And so I'm really glad to know that you're not going down without a fight because that is a completely absurd. And I love how you took ownership, right? You're like, I have no problem repaying my loan responsibility, but I mean, good grief, right? Like, I get put into this situation and I'm trying to make the most of it. And so that's really where my experience is just so sharply in alignment. And I guess comparatively, since I haven't had that happen and thankfully have not gotten to the point of default, it's gotten close. And I remember when my credit saw a 150-point drop overnight because I was 24 at the time and trying just to get anything I could, just to get money coming in. And then it was not nearly enough to contend with Sally Mae's $750 a month expectation. And I mean, that's the thing is I had remembered trying profusely to get agents on the phone, share my story, be like, I'm unemployed. Does that mean anything to you? Like, it's not like I'm just withholding your money. It's I am in a job market that has just been very, non-lucrative for me. Like I've been putting myself out there, networking, everything I could think of, and I was just coming up short. And then what money I was making, we're talking 1,000 a month max when I did have if money coming in. I was a contractor, I was a temp worker. I had one started before this, and I mean, I was just in as abysmal as a financial and earning situation as one could probably get. And I mean, to answer my own question, it was clear that it didn't resonate. And so I thought that when I refinanced my private loans, I had, them initially through Sally Mae and then got away from them about this time last year. But then this new company, they propped themselves up to be the next best thing since sliced bread of, oh, with us, you can bundle and save, you can tether your student loan payments to an investment portfolio. So build your wealth while you pay down your debt. Like it just seems like, oh, this is the perfect mix. In
Mhm.
practice, though, I've now seen that it is so hyped up and they're no different. And I think I was very naive going into that because I'm like, okay, whereas Sally Mae is obviously like the behemoth of private lending corporations, these guys, very small, very nimble, pretty early, relatively speaking, startup themselves, and it's like a very intimate team. And I was able to meet with every single one of the leadership members. I think it was 3 or 4 people at the time. And so it felt a lot more personal. It felt like white glove service. And, we're here to assist you personally. And here's how we can crunch your numbers and give you all these options. And then a year later, I'm making double payments, 2,000 a month, right? Trying to just throw money. And I look at that summary breakdown to see that only about 60 of those dollars actually went to the principal,
Mhm.
right? And I'm like, literally, how do you expect that I'm going to make any headway? Because now it's not that I'm not paying, it's you are misplacing my money and you're trying to basically tell me that I can't be more aggressive with the loan and all your options are curated in your favor to where the loan
Mhm.
afterthought. And the most I can pay on that is I believe like 300. And if I could have it my way, I would pay 100% toward that, right? And just the email exchanges where it does become personal, totally to your point where you mentioned the familial harassment. So that happened with Sally Mae. In this case, I don't have any co-signers, so thankfully it is at least able to like shield that from happening again, and I don't have to worry about jeopardizing personal relationships, but I still take it personally, right? And just when I see the rebuttals and just them kind of trying to force my hand in going their way, I'm like, first of all, who do y'all think y'all about to bully? Right? It's my money and I should be able to have more control and say, I don't want to invest aggressively right now because I have this money, I have the federal loans that have now kicked back in, and I need to be smart about where it goes, right?
Yeah.
So I feel your pain 100%, and I just think that there's definitely a karma bubble around all of this. As I said in episode 1, as I've been saying, every bubble bursts, and this is certainly far from sustainable. Um,
Mhm.
so, just I guess to segue the conversation around that point, in terms of the outlook, right? So you're obviously a crusader too by being in the nonprofit space, and you've defied your circumstances to start many meaningful things and get involved with other organizations and foundations. What is your personal outlook on the trajectory of this? Which, as of right now, the student debt crisis is on track to hit 3 trillion by 2042, and I think that's a conservative measure. So, what do you perceive in terms of the journey ahead until we can finally start to reverse that trend?
I mean, I think that, unsustainable is a really good word. And, bubble is another one. I just cannot imagine, we're of two different generations, probably 15 years apart, I'm assuming. But you take a 20-year span of former students now in the workforce, now trying to navigate, build their lives, 20, 30 something, late 20s, 30 something, 40 something. Imagine we fast forward, 30 years from now, and this cluster of people start to reach retirement age. We're already seeing, that Social Security is not enough for, boomers who are retiring now, that if they don't have a pension, or if they had the opportunity to save, retirement is not really an option. This is why we see, older folks continuing to work, to survive. And so imagine a generation or multiple generations of folks who still have student loans in retirement, um, and having to make, those same choices, with their Social Security, or if they're lucky enough to have a pension, or if they're lucky enough to have saved money and they're on a fixed income,
Right.
right? I mean, that's where we're headed. We're headed to a scenario where, you're talking, where I can't even imagine the hardships and the number of hardships that we're going to see in this country, because folks are not going to, even after a lifetime of working, not be able to pay off their student loans.
Hmm.
That seems crazy. That feels like indentured servitude, a lifetime of making payments. And to your point, those payments being mostly interest payments. And, I have, of course, I get it. Interest, somebody gives you money, they're going to want to collect some type of interest on that, but like reasonable, right? The total balance of my loan right now is about $153,000.
Jeez.
I borrowed 72, right? Even if we net out the 50 that was unfairly and justly tacked onto that, um, that's still about $30,000, 25, $30,000 in interest. Well, considering the fact that I graduated in 2006, it was a little while ago. We're now 2023. That's, over 15 years of interest, right? Accumulating,
Yep.
on that $72,000, while I'm making minimal payments, or in some cases deferring payments when possible. I'm now 45 years old, right? Retirement is around the corner for me. I'm closer now to that than I've ever been in my life, right? And so, can I realistically pay off $152,000 in the next 15 years, right? Like, and so that's what I see. I see, just that burden becoming too much for folks to bear, and I see a lot of folks ultimately going into default. I see it having, huge effect to our economy, and also to the mental health and well-being. As a clinical social worker, that's something that I'm constantly um, looking at and considering. And right now, it's, speaking to that word, financial trauma, like folks are getting it from so many different angles, like beyond um, the student loan, right? With inflation and just cost of living, and, the house of renting, what it costs to rent, what it costs to own, right? These numbers keep skyrocketing, and the pressure is getting more and more for us to bear. And so student loans is a big thing. And I imagine that, if we get some great leadership in government that understands this issue, and what would become possible if folks were relieved of that burden, what it would do for our economy, what it would do for the well-being of our country. And I'm not talking about, some of the programs that have come out. Of course, you want to applaud any effort to give people relief, but, when you got to jump through so many hoops, or when you set up the criteria such that, you know only a small percentage of folks who have that crippling debt could actually qualify for relief,
Yeah.
that's not helpful either. And for somebody who worked in low income schools for over a decade, um, technically met those schools in those neighborhoods met the criteria of some of these loan forgiveness programs. But because I ran my own nonprofit, I was not an employee of the district, I did not qualify for those programs because I could not pay myself a salary. And as a result, couldn't make my monthly payments, and I don't have those 120 consecutive payments, right? That was another factor as well. And so it's like, it's so unfair that even the support that is being offered, for legitimate reasons, a lot of people cannot qualify and access because of technicalities,
Yeah.
right? And so I hope that changes, because if it doesn't, there's going to be severe consequences for this country, for our economy, for
Mhm.
the mental health and well-being, which has already taken a hit because of things like COVID and everything that's happening in the world. And yeah, so that's kind of where I see it going. It's something, you can only kick the can down the field so much, and eventually you're going to have to face it. And it's not just our problem, because our problem affects the economy, it affects the government, it affects this, stability of this country, when you have so many people affected by this issue.
I love that you're bringing this up because I see so many people who are on the outside and they're fortunate to either have had minimal debt or they had it and they paid it off or they didn't have any at all. And it's just like, boo hoo, quit crying. And you've just expertly laid out the whole fundamental issue is that this system was built for failure because it's predicated upon exploitation, not service. You
Mm-hmm.
know, student loans were completely intended with the right spirit when they were first established in the 40s, coming out of the war during the GI Bill era. And it was really a way to give people a leg up. Like, okay, you're not made of money. Here's $1,000, which was the maximum. Like, let's just remember how it started. 1,000 US dollars, which adjusted for inflation today, still I don't believe is more than 15, maybe 17K per school year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a much more direct subsidiary to be able to say, okay, now you've gotten this stepping stone to get through college, which was the only meaningful institution for education, by the way, at that time. And then you take that degree and convert it into earnings and pay that off, and you live your happy best life. And, once it became privatized and people identified that loophole, again, exploitation, that's the sin of this whole thing is
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they were bad actors who decided, oh, wait a minute, like this is a lucrative industry in the making here. And that the CEO of Sally Mae can fly his whole team out to Hawaii and take luxurious vacations, while, as you described, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people defaulting, families being ripped up, and just you touching on how this impacted at the time being married. I I have come to terms with the fact that my personal relationship, I high school sweetheart situation, and dated for about 5 years until last summer, that was completely charged the game of being debt constrained because it made me so incapacitated in my ability to just cut in, put up half the cost, even for like date nights. We're not even talking just living expenses, although that was a frequent hang up point. But I completely know how that goes. And so it's just like, how are we supposed to be able to build together and get ahead if I've got this massive albatross around my neck? And so that's the other really frustrating piece of this is really getting out of debt can be essentially boiled down to two things: cut costs, increase income. And for so long, when I started my debt snowball journey in 2019, I became a master at cost cutting. And I was, as Ramit Sethi says, cutting them mercilessly, prioritizing my bare bones essentials, got rid of all frills, all subscriptions, all anything that basically brought me joy. And I rolled up my sleeves and started working. And I had to swallow my pride as an Ivy League grad who's working in retail, right? Working jobs that high schoolers are getting, for summer. And just being able to say, this is the start of my next trajectory where I don't have to live like this anymore. And it won't be overnight, but I'm like, surely the hard work and diligence will be rewarded. And I think to a point it has, but at the end of the day, a lot of people lose sight of the fact that even though I am at the head of this organization and all these different efforts, that I'm still dealing with my own debt burden. And it still is a massive pain, you know what, for me. And that was part of my frustration going back to my beef with the lenders is, they're in your ear. And my response is back off. Like I really had to kind of tell the guy the other day, like, cease and desist with pressuring me over email because I'm like, leave me alone so I can go to work and make this bank and then get y'all out of my life. I'm not trying to play games. I'm not trying to, be cryptic or different. I have my options, and so the only thing I can do is figure out creative ways to get my money up, and that takes time to build relationships, right? Um, I'm a woman of faith, and so I've been watching a lot of sermons and reading scripture that says, ask and keep asking, seek and keep seeking, knock and keep knocking. And it really just harps on the idea of not losing hope. And when you have big goals, to not back down off of them. Like they won't happen immediately. It's not, I've learned that to reap a harvest is achieved through a vine, not a vending machine, right? And so it does take that investment. And to the disdain of the lenders, it's not something you snap your fingers and then, oh, I've got six-figure checks rolling in, here you go. I know that this is something that I have to be persistent with and keep at and be really patient with. But of course, right, it's hard to be patient, and you can only be so patient with opportunity leads when these guys are knocking down your door today and where they just won't let you get a moment's rest. So yeah, I feel like just there's so much here that hopefully will benefit others who have listened either real time with us or will go back and watch this and share it. Of course, I'd love to keep this going, but I just saw that we're right at the half hour mark, and also I know it's Friday and the Veterans Day holiday, so to bring things to a close, I would just ask if there's any final advice and action that you want to share with the audience that we can post about and leave people with as they think on how they're going to surpass their own treacherous collection tactic traumas.
Of course, yes. I would say, as somebody who, as I mentioned, compartmentalization was a strategy, and denial, that and just avoidance. It got to a point to where I was actually when the topic came up, I would have what felt like anxiety and sometimes panic attacks. And what I learned was to confront it. And, especially with the opportunity to buy a house, the moment came where I could no longer avoid, confronting this monster in my life, that threatened my sense of safety and security and future. And, there's a saying that I often look to when I need encouragement. The only way past it is through it.
Mhm.
And I this thing is not bigger than me, although it at times has felt so crippling. And I am strong, and I am creative, and there are others out there that share my pain. And we are strong, and we are creative, and we are a force. And we can advocate for ourselves and find ways to improve our situation, but also to you know to shift the scales, because it's just not things need to change, right? And not just from student loans perspective, how much livable wage perspective, how much people are earning out there, the cost of living, rents and mortgages. I mean, it's retirement and saving for retirement, right? It's just like it's just not sustainable. And so we really, as a country, as a world, need to come together and face these things that we've avoided for so long. And student loan debt, and the way that the cost of education, especially higher education, and the way that young folks are supported, and even just the future of work, right? Like all this needs to shift. And so if we're going to have a future that we want to pass on to our kids. So I know that it's within my power, it's within your power, within our power, and to remember our power even when we feel disempowered and victimized, because we need to transcend that state of victimization and move from being a victim to a creator.
Yes.
And we can create those solutions together and for ourselves, for our communities. So that would be my tip, my advice. And Also, call to action. What we gonna do about it?
Yes, that part. Like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work because we were absolutely put on this earth on purpose, for purpose, with a purpose. And so I think, yes, you hit it on the head. Victims are not the way to go. We are victors over our circumstances. And, ultimately this is a roadmap that others can learn from. And hopefully, right, the right folks in power will take cues from our stories and be able to take what power they have to turn the tide more immediately. And, again, my faith gives me so much hope and peace around this because I'm like, bad behavior can only go on for so long. Once again, that every bubble burst thing, that is tried and true, and no one ever truly gets away with anything. Justice is always restored. It may not be when we would like it to be, but I just have full trust in people get what's coming to them for better and for worse. So we are overcomers, and we got this. And just again, thank you so much for opening up to our audience, going there, sharing how this has impacted you. Obviously, of course, I'm rooting for you, and I'm excited for us to team up officially once we do make that happen.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bree.